Hi, in this video I'm going to be talking about how and why forgiveness and letting go and release work can help to reduce and bring down anxiety. I'm Orla Kirby. I'm a therapist specialising in helping people to move themselves away from anxiety and or OCD. Now, if you've ever struggled with anxiety, you'll know it can be very difficult to manage and to deal with and to try to move away from. So I brought together some resources here around forgiveness and letting go. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the hows and whys of it. Why is this a useful thing to do? What's the connection between forgiveness and letting go and bringing down anxiety? They might not seem obviously related at first. And then in the next video, I'm going to talk about specific exercises and methods that you can use by yourself to actually engage with the forgiveness and the letting go and the release in order to bring down anxiety. Okay, so I'm going to talk first of all in this video about awareness and whether or not people are aware that there's a need to forgive or let go, and that may be connected to the anxiety they're experiencing. Then I'm going to talk about what happens if we do hold on, if we are holding on to emotion from the past, challenging, difficult emotion from the past. What impact does that have in terms of our stress levels, our anxiety levels? And then I'm going to talk about the real kind of detailed functioning of that. So how specific thought patterns can be linked with specific fears or anxieties, and that can be linked with a specific stored emotion from the past. And then also how the habits of low road processing and high road processing that our brain can get into, and how that relates to forgiveness and letting go. And then I'm going to talk about the overall vision and view of the world that we have, and of ourselves and other people, and how positively or negatively we're viewing that, how safe or not that seems to us at a conscious and a subconscious level, and how that relates to both our anxiety levels and also how that relates to forgiveness and letting go, how the two interrelate. Okay, so forgiveness and letting go. Sometimes people are aware that there's a connection between this and their anxiety levels. So sometimes, I might have a client come to me who's very anxious about, injections, say. Someone's very anxious about needles and injections, and they had a very difficult experience when they were 7, connected with an injection, and they can see that there's a very clear through line. They absolutely know that that's a very strong connection there, that early experience and the emotion they experienced around that, and the emotion they now encounter if they think about going for an injection now. However, sometimes people really aren't aware. Sometimes people might think, oh, I've already let go of this, or I've already forgiven that, or I've already forgiven that person, or I've already released that experience that I had that was challenging 10 years ago. This is about something else. And that might be the case, but it also might not be, right? Sometimes we're not fully aware of where we are in terms of forgiveness and letting go. Or sometimes, it can just be more that the focus is the present day. So someone might be thinking, I'm very anxious right now because it's very stressful at work. Or my anxiety always gets high at this time of year. Or there's a lot going on in my family right now, or in my relationship, or with my children, so of course I'm anxious, of course my anxiety is sky high. And they are, or it might be all of those, right? That might be a problem in many areas of life currently, and the focus is on that as being linked to, current experience of anxiety. And the person might have forgotten all about something that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and where they've stored a lot of negative emotion from that. And that memory, that emotive memory, is being triggered, and that is also contributing to current anxiety. Now, in a more detailed way, what's actually happening here? What do I mean when I say that this stored negative emotion from the past can be linked with the anxiety that someone's experiencing now, today? Well, first of all, kind of like I was saying at the beginning, there can be a very specific link. So, someone could be in an accident involving a particular animal and then be very frightened of that animal and have a lot of anxious thoughts and anxious feelings around that particular animal later on in life. And that might spread to other things then associated with that animal or associated with that earlier incident. Phobias, if they're not resolved, can spread to other associated things. And that's partly because the brain can get into a certain habit of anxiety, or of any kind of child mind, like a lizard mind led emotional or mental state. So first of all, simply to say that if you release that if that person is able to therapeutically go back and release that early memory around that animal, of course that's going to completely shift how they feel about that animal, now, right? So of course the two are connected. In a more complex way, it's true that anytime we trigger or kind of wake up again that negative stored emotion from the past, we're prompting our brain into what's called low road processing, right? So there's two ways that we can process data and information. One is called low road processing, and one is called high road processing. Sorry, cough today. So the low road processing is where data comes into our brain, and it gets passed first of all to the thalamus, where it always goes first. And then the data travels from our thalamus to our hypothalamus, which is kind of the between body and mind communicating part of our early or lizard mind. And then from there gets passed very quickly to the amygdala, right in the center of the early mind, the lizard mind, the child mind, right there in the middle of our brain, straight into our amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that is responsible for selecting fight or flight or freeze or not. So that's a very direct route into that child mind, that early mind, that lizard mind. So thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, very, very fast. And the more stressed we are, the higher our stress levels, the higher our anxiety, our anger, our fear, the more of a low mood we're in, the more we are being led by any of those kind of emotional states, the more low road processing we're doing. The greater proportion of the data coming into our brains is being processed in this low road route where it's going thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, right? And the amygdala is deciding, do I panic about this? Generally, the amygdala is going to say, yes, let's err on the safe side, right? Because the amygdala is designed around survival and protecting you, and it generally will opt for fight or flight or freeze. The other way of processing data is the high road processing, and this is where data comes in at first to your thalamus, and then it gets passed all the way to the back of your brain, to the occipital lobes, which are the parts of your brain at the back, your cortex, that come really alive and awake when you're dreaming or when you're in hypnosis, and they're very connected with visualizing, with imagining. So the occipital lobes, and then it gets passed all the way, filtered and passed through your cortex, and it arrives here at your left prefrontal cortex. And you get an opportunity there to halt this process, right? The left prefrontal cortex can decide, does this information, this data, need to go to the amygdala or not, right? If it's not a crisis, maybe not. So there's an opportunity there for stopping, right? Because all of this processing, whether high road or low road, is incredibly fast, right? So it's not something you can stop in the moment. You can't in the moment decide, oh, well, I think I should low road process that, or I'm going to high road process this, right? It's all happening incredibly, unimaginably quickly, right? So it's only in a different way that we can, in a less direct way, that we can impact this. And it's worth saying that we're always doing a certain amount of both. So the more calm we are, and the more happy we are, the more we're feeling well in ourselves, and the more sleep we've had, the better we're feeling generally, the more high road processing we're going to do, right? So that's that longer, slower route. I mean, it's still very, very fast, but it is a longer route where the information goes thalamus, occipital lobes, through the whole cortex, to the left prefrontal cortex, and the left prefrontal cortex gets to decide what to do then, right? That's the high road processing. And we'll do more of that, the calmer and the happier we're feeling, and it gives us a more full use and access to all of our resources, our creativity, our rational thinking, our logical mind, our problem solving, our complex skills, our rich narrative memories. That high road processing enables us to access all of that so much more. So remember, we're always doing some of either. Yeah, so you're never going to get to zero low road processing. That's just impossible. A very, very extremely high amount of low road processing would be, if you think of like a crowd in a place where there's been a bomb threat, or there's a fire, or someone's shouted fire, right, in a crowded theatre or a crowded concert venue, and people are rushing to get out, and there's that kind of stampede, and people have even forgotten who they are, right? People are like walking or running over other people. It's horrible. That is almost full, that's very, very high low road processing, right? Many of us will never even experience that though. So generally we're doing a certain amount of both, depending on how we're feeling. It's also dependent though on what we were doing yesterday and what we were doing the day before and the day before that, because the brain gets into certain habits, and this is very proven now, right? That the more high road processing we do on a Tuesday, the easier it's going to be to do high road processing, more high road processing on the Wednesday. And if we do a decent amount of high road processing on the Tuesday and the Wednesday, on the Thursday, it's going to be easier again to do high road processing. And if you look across the whole month, there is a long-term impact. And the more we do of either, the easier it is to do of that one. So the more low road processing we do, the brain gets used to that. It gets into a habit of processing kind of straight to the amygdala, and we'll do more and more of that. And more high road processing encourages more high road processing the next day, the next week, the next month. Okay, so that might seem to have drifted quite far from forgiveness and letting go, but I wanted to explain that fully because it's important to know that we are establishing habits all the time, right? And shifting habits and changing patterns if we want to. That's the way that our brain works. So every time we access, a memory from the past, which still has a very high amount of stored negative emotion, so stored anger from 10 years ago, stored sadness from when we were 7, stored fear from when we were 8, right? Anytime we access one of those, even for a moment, we are waking up some low road processing, right? And if we think about it for a long time, if we spend a whole day thinking about it, that's loads and loads of low road processing that we're waking up, that we're starting off. And that is significant, not just in that moment, but for the next day. The next day it's going to make it, even if we don't access that memory again, it's going to make it more likely that we will do more low road processing. And the next day, if that day we've done that, the next day that has an impact. So it's very crucial what's happening when we draw memories into our mind, how much stored negative emotion are we accessing, because it starts off these patterns that then almost take on a life of their own. So if we can clear and release, a huge amount of that stored negative emotion, of the anger, hurt, sadness, fear, guilt that we may be holding in our minds from things that happened many years ago or last week or 5 years ago, if we can clear and release that, so that we can draw that memory into our mind, or that person comes up in our mind, or that event comes up in our mind, and we don't re-experience the emotion. We feel, a sense that that's past. We don't really connect with anger or fear or sadness. We remember the thing happening. We may have lessons that we carry with us from that event or that happening, but we don't go into that emotional state again. That's so powerful because we can stay in our high road processing then, right? We haven't been derailed into low road processing, and that sets up a really great pattern for the next day and the next day and the next day. Okay, and that, of course, is huge for moving away from anxiety, because anxiety is deeply connected with low road processing. Yeah, they're very connected with one another, because anxiety is both the cause of and what happens when our child mind, or the early lizard mind, the amygdala, the hippocampus and the hypothalamus being too much in charge, being the force that's leading our decision making, right? That is what happens when we're anxious, and it's also what leads to anxiety. If you'd like to know more about that, you could go to orlakirby.com /how your brain works to understand that in more detail. But essentially, the more low road processing we're doing, the more anxiety we're going to be feeling, and the more anxiety we're feeling, the more low road processing we're doing also. So because forgiveness is a way of shifting yourself into a whole different way of processing the information and the data that comes into your mind, it's a hugely powerful way of shifting yourself away from anxiety. And then lastly, in a way, I'm just repeating what I've said in a different way. But if you think about the whole way that you view the world and yourself and other people and the future, how are you thinking and feeling about those things in general, at a conscious level, at a subconscious level. By forgiving and letting go of stored negative emotion from the past, you can shift all of that. You can change all of that radically. And that has such a huge impact on your day-to-day reality and on your level of anxiety. So, for example, if my amygdala at any moment is making a selection as to whether to go into a flight state that's very connected with anxiety or not, in any moment, that it's going to be basing that selection on flicking through very fast templates that are stored in another part of that early mind or child mind, the hippocampus, right? And you always want to think of these as like files in a filing cabinet, and they are template memories. So they're very simple, they're very condensed, and they have a strong emotional label. So if you think of the kind of memories that a fox would have, or a badger, found food over there, someone tried to kill me over there, right? And they've got a very almost like a snapshot. It's not a whole story, it's not a whole detailed story, it's a snapshot with a strong positive or a strong negative emotional label, and filed away for future use. And it's a pattern matching system. So your amygdala, as it's going through these files, is looking for anything in those templates that is the same as or similar to what's happening today. It's looking for something that matches. And it's a very, very fast process. So if you think of the amygdala as flicking through what happened last time, what happened last time, what happened last time, all of these thousands and thousands of templates and files from your past life that you've stored, you can't interfere with that process in the moment, really. Well, you can. You can use slow breathing, and you can use visualization, and you can use all of the techniques that we talked about in this series, right? That there is stuff you can do in the moment. Of course there is. But you can't, what I mean is you can't directly instruct your amygdala to do something else, because this is all happening subconsciously, right? That flicking through, what happened last time, what happened last time, what happened last time. However, you can change what's actually in those files. You can change what's in that filing cabinet. That is so powerful. Because imagine if your amygdala is making a selection of whether to go into to fight or flight or not, and it goes to your filing cabinet, and in your filing cabinet, it's like a lot of those negative templates have been removed, or just radically altered so that they're not as negative, or not negative at all. They're positive templates now. That's a hugely different situation for your brain, right? And it's going to lead to you going into fight or flight necessarily much less often, because the templates that you're basing those decisions on are entirely different, right? And how do you change what's in those filing cabinets, what's in those files? Through forgiveness and through letting go. Because remember, those templates were made when you made a strong kind of snapshot or template where you associated a particular kind of snapshot memory with a very strong emotion. So in the case of a strong negative emotion, you're associating intense anger with this particular colour and place and person or whatever. Or you're associating intense sadness and loneliness with, again, this snapshot over here. And these are all in your filing cabinet. And if you can do some therapeutic work to release that emotion, release the anger, the stored anger from 10 years ago, the stored fear from when you were 5 years old, the stored hurt and guilt from a month ago, if you can release all of that, that is a hugely different picture of the world, of yourself, of other people. So just you've entirely transformed what's actually in the filing cabinet. And first of all, that does absolutely shift that process when you're searching and when your subconscious mind's deciding what state to go into. It also changes things all of the time, right? Because you're just not carrying it all around with you. So if you are carrying all of those templates, it's like, in a way, there are hundreds of thousands of films or plays going on inside your mind constantly, right? Of, this thing that happened and I felt very sad, and this thing that happened and I felt very angry, and this thing, and all of this is going on all the time. It takes a huge amount of energy to keep that going, to run that. And if you can release and clear some of that stored negative emotion, it just frees up a lot of space and a lot of energy that you can then use to move yourself towards whatever it is that you want, whatever it is that you want to create, the kind of future that you want to create. And you know, that is one of the most powerful ways to move yourself away from anxiety, is to step towards, to imagine, and then to take steps towards the future that you want to make. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. The next video in this series is on actual practical techniques and exercises that you can go through in order to engage with forgiveness and letting go in order to reduce anxiety. Thanks very much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.